Again, if anybody is in need of an entree, please just raise your hand so the venue staff can see. But I think the vegetarian entrees are coming if you requested one. Those are coming out fresh. So we're going to go ahead and do our keynote speaker. We are lucky enough to have Anne Coulombe, a very, very seasoned CISO. Anne is we would say, is a transformational cybersecurity leader with privacy and data protection technology, DevOps integration, and cloud background. She really focuses on using that big picture view to create logic from chaos, with a focus on identifying structural connections and anomalies in complex systems, while organizing and clarifying ideas for creative improvement. One of her claims to fame, she saved a company once over a cup of coffee. So please give a warm welcome for Anne. She's going to take us through in this next hour as our keynote, Future-Proofing During Rapid Change. Anne, take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy lunch hour, everyone. And by the way, please keep eating. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about making noise. I'm here to entertain you. All right, let's get this started. So thank you so very much from FutureCon for inviting me. As I mentioned, my name is Anne Coulombe, and the topic today, I'll take you on a little journey, but as part of the journey, it's really about can you and how do you future-proof during rapid change? So as part of this, let me start with just a little bit of, I guess I pressed the wrong button. There we go. Who am I? And why am I chatting with you today? So a couple of things. That top part was my COVID project. I like to build things. So in building, it's not just about cybersecurity, it's also about how things work, what do they look like, what are the connections, where do we go from here? So yes, I'm a sailor. I've taken my dogs all the way to Switzerland to go up and down mountains. You can see that. And most recently, I was the CISO at Orphan, which is a medical device company. I also do some vCISO work that is large data for institutional investment. And in and out of the cyber industry, I call it sort of my 30-20-10. 30 years in tech, 20 in security, and at least 10 in privacy. I'm probably off by a couple of years, but that doesn't really matter. So when do you future-proof? And how do you future-proof? A couple of things. You have to start thinking about it right now, because the future is uncertain. You're not quite sure what it's going to look like tomorrow, and things can change very, very rapidly. Most companies, are you surprised that I say they carry tech debt? Is anyone surprised by this one? Mm-hmm. So the tech debt can look like many different things. It could be what your product looked like. It could be your IT infrastructure. It could be the end portion. You never quite know. And I like to call the regulatory environment a bowl of spaghetti. And the reason I call it that is, remember how, especially when you were a kid, you pulled one piece of spaghetti out and you didn't really know where it was going to go and if the right or the left would start coming up? That, to me, is the regulatory environment. There are some things you must absolutely do. You have the pasta and you have the sauce. But once you have that, you have to determine what it's going to look like, how you'll deal with it, what's the best methodology for getting there. How many of you twist spaghetti? Okay, it's fair. Don't be shy. You can tell me if you twist spaghetti or not. And how many of you just get in there and cut it all up? Okay, some of you get in there and cut it all up. This is the regulatory environment we have. It still means that at the end of the day, you're meeting the goal, which is nourishment, feed yourself, but there's more than one way of getting there. And that's really what I'm trying to share. The other thing is the speed of change these days, and at least in the industries that I've been in, is like a roller coaster. Some days it's really quick, some days it's really slow. So it's a little bit of both. And I happen to do a lot of things that are international, which means that when we look at the US and Europe, it's just different. And they're running at different speeds. And then you add Asia Pacific into this, and they're also running at different speeds. So how can you look at change? Okay, I happen to be a Trekkie, so to boldly go where no one has gone before. And that doesn't mean you are alone. You are a group of people who takes chances, but you take calculated chances, calculated risk in terms of determining where you want to go, what to look like, and where to go. So these are a couple of bullet points. I won't read them all to you. These are really sort of to think about. But AI is here. It can help you if you use it properly. Supply chain risks. Even though it's one of the lower bullets, it's actually one of the risks that I think that all of us should really consider as one of the largest risks. Who knows exactly what is in their software? Who has an SBOM? Okay, one person has an SBOM, but how many open source components are in your SBOM? And do you know how often those open source components have changed? Oh, and we heard the story this morning of how somebody got into Target and Walmart and a whole set of other stores. You never quite know what is in your third-party supply chain, so just really pay attention to that. And by the way, that's one of the key things. If you're really trying to secure for the future, understand what you have. It doesn't mean that you have to secure everything 100% today, but understand where you are. And make sure your C-suite is heading in the same direction you are. Make sure they're invested, and make sure you understand where they are. And the last thought I'll leave you with on this page is threat actors. You heard about some of that this morning. You'll hear some more this afternoon, and as part of the vendor environment as well. Guess what? They have a lot of money. And they also get a lot of money when they come in and they do a ransomware attack or they do something else. And many of them are state-based actors. And that should worry us. It should worry us in a whole set of different sectors, because that doesn't mean it's onesies, twosies. They're really who's coming up next. So let me share a little bit of my cyber philosophy. It's only 3 slides, and then we'll start to get into an example. So the first thing is make sure that you reduce what you don't know. I call this the amorphous blob of you walk in as a brand new CISO and you say, oh, how much do I not know? Quite a bit. Right? And even if you ask yourself the same question, 6 months in, 12 months in, do you still know everything? That's almost impossible. So if you take that amorphous blob and try to reduce it, in other words, you've increased what you know, so now you increase what you do know, you can protect what is now known or understood. And this resonates with executives because they can understand that progression. Take this big thing, lower the risk, increase what you know, and protect the pieces. So that's the first part. The second part, very important, compliance does not equal security. Just because you are compliant does not mean your infrastructure is secure against all the threats that are out there. And why do I say that? I often use the example of a car. Why does a car have red lights on the back? Is it for the person driving? Do I need it to drive my car? Nope, absolutely not. It's actually to indicate to the individuals, or in this case, any kind of automated vehicle that's behind you, that you're slowing down or that something has happened so that they can react fast enough. You're keeping security in line. but it's still, and that's why it was deemed to now add lights on the back of vehicles. Way back when, horse and buggy, do you think they had lights on the back of the buggy? No, they had lights on the front of the buggy so that they could see you coming. They didn't care that you were leaving because nobody was coming up behind them that fast. So this is an evolution. These are some of the security controls that keep changing. And the third part of my cyber philosophy is take care of the basics. This will keep you going into the future. But once you have the basics, get creative. This is where you can add AI. This is where you can add the next generation. This is where you can get a little fancier with some of the tools. You can try things. You can then also take all the information that you have and start to feed it into systems that really will give you a proper dashboard of what is happening in your organization. But you can really only do that once the basics are secure. And by secure, I don't mean that they have controls on absolutely everything, but you have a generally good understanding of what's happening in your organization, and you can understand when something is not correct. And that's sometimes more important than understanding everything's great. So what do businesses care about? I think the top thing is money. I mean, why not? Are you in business to not make money? It makes sense to me. So if we think about what the businesses are caring about the most, these are some of the ideas. And some individuals call them top 10, top 6, top 10. The real question is security part of those top 10? And I'm going to argue the answer is no. It's not security in a little box with a cute icon. It's security embedded in all of these top 10. And if you can really get to the point where security is visible to you at the same time, then that's actually where you've really ended up securing your entire business. So ask yourself, is it a value add? Is it a cost? Ask yourself how you integrate all of this. If you're doing any kind of software development, or whether that's internal or whether it's a product, how far down the road are you in security by design? And what is the maturity level of your own organization? Because understanding the maturity level will actually permit you to understand how to be prepared for this crazy future that is the roller coaster that is running faster and faster. So these are all pieces and portions together. And then, I call it the chicken or egg, but what comes first, innovation or security? Can you innovate very quickly in a company without cyber? And can you do cyber if you're not innovating? And I won't necessarily give you an answer. It's just something to think about. So let's take a little bit of a journey. And I'm going to use the medical device industry just to give you an idea of what's going on in this particular industry. So, target, patient care, and these are not comprehensive slides if you're in the medical device industry. And by the way, how many of you are either in healthcare or med devices? Okay? So you'll recognize some of this. Some of this will apply a little more to you, some won't, because it depends which part of the industry you're in. So back in April this year, there was a notification, Cyber and Critical Infrastructure. It came out in April. And the link is here. What it really said is the US government looked at this and said, hey, there are 16 areas of concern that are really something that the US has to pay attention to. And of those, there are 2 that concern us more today, just as part of this chat, which is information technology, healthcare, and public sector. And you saw this morning in some of the presentations, electrical infrastructure and those kind of things. Yes, they are all part of the infrastructure. But what it really means is, let's pay attention to this. So the US has realized that the healthcare system in the US is a little broken. Does anybody disagree with me? Okay. Okay, I'm seeing a couple people saying, oh yeah, finally, somebody's saying that out loud. Well, it is, and all the different components in it, everybody has the best intentions. It is about patient care. But inside the realm of patient care, does it mean that we have managed to secure all these pieces and parts? Heck no. At least 2/3 of you in this room have had your data breached already this year from healthcare issues. And you'll see that on a couple of slides from now. And one of the things that I would share, and this is a study that has come out, so on the medical device cybersecurity maturity model. This one is done on CMMI. It's fairly similar if you were to do a NIST score or you were to do a CMMC score. You'd find yourself in a similar situation. But here's what's a little bit scary. 1.6 over 5, or 186. Here's a couple of other things. None of these get over 3. And without reading the whole thing to you, one of the things that we recognize, or should recognize, at least in the medical device industry, which will touch all of us at some point in our lives, or if not us, our family or loved ones, is that financial services is up here. Nobody's ever a 5. So let's say it's 4 or 4 up. Then you have insurance, and then you have some other parts of manufacturing, and then you have healthcare down here. And about the only thing that's way below is agriculture. And so the evolution here, when we say rapid evolution and we say, how do you secure this? Everything's changing all at once. The infrastructure is changing, the network is changing, the devices are changing, the software is changing. How many of you walk into a hospital and actually take your phones in? Right? Right? There's a whole 5G infrastructure just for people who are visiting people in hospitals. It has nothing to do with what you're actually running as the devices. So it's just things to consider. We haven't seen this yet much in this country, but it has been seen in other countries where there's been individual attacks on devices because they wanted to harm a very particular individual. But maybe one day we'll see that here. And unfortunately, some of those have been government sanctioned. And so it's not just about what's running, it's about how do you get into it for a specific individual. Let's say you're running an insulin pump, or you have a pacemaker. Do you really want somebody interfering with that? I mean, probably not, right? I wouldn't. But these are just some considerations. So here's a bit of landscape. And think of this as just sort of educational background. This is the InfoSec. I have 3 slides. So the InfoSec part, just to do business, there are a few things. And I'm focusing a little bit more on US and Europe at the same time here. And so US and Europe, you have all your business things, SOX, GLBA, the SEC, FCC, you name it, a whole set of 3-letter and 4-letter acronyms. But then you have the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. It's really their job to make sure that there's consistency and there are compliance and verification. We want them to be out there. If there's an E. coli outbreak on your lettuce, you want the FDA to pay attention to it so that they can save a whole set of people. In Europe, it's actually the EU level. There's a lot of laws and regulations that cover all of the EU. UDIMED just happens to be a database that includes all of this. And by the way, both the FDA and UDIMED have databases that you as public citizens can go and look at. So if you have questions about medical devices that you happen to be utilizing, go look at it. Just look it up. You can see recalls, you can see information, you can see a whole set of different things. Then you get into the business part. The business part. I particularly like NIST 2.0, but that's not the only thing. So now you get into your SOC 2 Type 2, you get into your ISO certifications, your 27001. It's like, ooh, I have an ISMS. Great. You have the ISMS. But does that mean you're secure? No, it means you're compliant. So as part of moving you all the way to that security realm, and especially if things are moving quickly in your industry, that's something to think about, which is how do you keep evolving it? Or how do you write it in a generic enough manner that your security controls can change, but your oversight and your governance doesn't have to change? You could still do that verification. And one of the things to think about if you're doing business in Europe is NIS2. It just came into being. It is now law. This affects how you report cyber incidents. Who do you report to, when do you report it, and what it has to look like. So there's quite a bit there. And then there's a whole set of privacy. What does it look like, where does it go? And I've just highlighted a couple, which is GDPR and HIPAA, but there's so much more. Yes, I know this is small font. It's not meant to read every line. This is what you have to do. It just means that there's a whole set of regulations that are very, very important. And I've highlighted sort of the top ones, US and Europe. But there is now official cybersecurity guidance from the FDA. There's also the power as part of the FD&A Act to make sure that the government, if they find that there is something that's not running properly on one of your devices, can actually recall it. It doesn't have to be a recall done by the manufacturer itself. It could actually be for some other reasons. And I'll get into a couple of examples just in a minute. There are 3 criteria that the FDA uses, to consider it a medical device, and without taking a long time on that particular subject, what it really means is, are you affecting somebody's life? Can you keep them alive? And do you know what's wrong with them? So those are kind of the 3 different criteria at a very, very high level of what this means. What I'd have your attention look at is the very bottom here, which is 2 things. GXP, which is good practices. So good practices in laboratories, in manufacturing, in those types of things. This is what you can automate with all your cybersecurity controls. And if you automate it, that means that you've actually prepared yourself for rapid change, because the changes to be compliant to all your GXP, you can know immediately. Like this. You can understand if your software or your code changed. You can understand if your physical environment changed. You can understand if the temperature changed. What if somebody stumbled across the power cord on your deep freezer on a Friday night and your sensors didn't go off? What happens? You lose a lot of things, right? Maybe you're losing some tests in process. Maybe you're losing a whole other set of raw material, a number of different things. So it's not just cyber, it's being ready for other things. And I know many of you have heard stories in the industry, and I have personal experience from the power going out. Oh gee, the power went out on the first system. It fried the secondary controller for the backup. Now what do? You have to bring in an 18-wheeler truck, which is a power source, and bypass the original entry of power into your building. So there's always a way, but you may have to be a little bit creative. So what happens then in post-market? Okay, that was all I was building. Now I'm selling. When you're selling, there's a whole other set of regulations that come in. And here's what's interesting and something that other industries should maybe think about, which is there's a whole purpose, which is this area here, post-market surveillance. Well, post-market surveillance is an ISO, but there's also the whole risk management piece, and there's also the QMS, so the quality management piece. All 3 of these have to work together all the way through your post-market environment. And it's not just, is the product operating properly, and patient health, harms. So harms means anything that could go awry within your particular environment. Guess what? Cyber is integral to all of this. Why? Because it's insidious. It's inside almost everything. But we are not yet, as an industry, at the point where we have controls on all of these. So oftentimes we're black boxing it. We're just looking from the outside in, rather than a white box or a gray box. And I know I'm throwing a lot of terminology. I'm assuming you understand. If you don't, just say, whoa, and we'll have some questions at the end. So these are some things to think about. MedWatch, which there's a link up here. This is, if you really have an interest in this industry, you can go and look at what's happening, what's being recalled, what's happening in the industry. And really what I'm trying to paint here as a picture is the fact that this whole set of infrastructure, protocols, etc., still doesn't mean everything is secure. It means that we've done the absolute best that we can in an environment that keeps changing fairly rapidly, and in an industry that also has some inherent or systemic issues with it, which I'll get into in a second. So what about medical device security? A couple of things. You may or may not be aware, but one of the industry issues is legacy devices. Just like your IT, there's a whole set of legacy. And part of this is due to the fact that between building and FDA regulations, you might be looking at 15 months, 24 months, sometimes it's even longer. By the time you ship, what about that operating system you started with? Is it still the same one? Or have you built into your product the fact that you want to be able to upgrade it or update it? Oh, and can you? Because depending on the effect, that may invalidate your 510K that you did with the FDA, which is how you got to market in the first place. And the other thing is there's useful life. So when I talk about rapid change, there might be rapid change around things, but not necessarily what's at the core. Do you change your car every year? I don't. I can't afford to do that. But does the software on my car change? Oh, constantly. Okay, yes, I drive a Tesla, but this software, one of the things that I've done is turn off auto updates. So I get to choose when. Because the last one they sent me was 55 minutes. Wow. Like, okay, I'd like to be secure, but 55 minutes? I'm going out for groceries. I don't have time right now. And so these are considerations that are actually the same ones that you find in the medical device industry. Do you think there's a little personal information on med devices? There's a lot of information. And it's not just on the device, it's all the connected systems. It's your hospital systems, it's your billing systems inside the hospital, inside the lab, inside the point of care. Then it goes to your insurance company, and then it comes back, and then you get a copy. And so it's a lot of data that is flying around the universe that may or may not be quite as protected as you think it might be, or perhaps as you would hope that it could be. And some of the typical controls we talked about a little bit earlier, but security by design, I personally love privacy by design, and the reason I do is if you have pretty decent security controls, it's a lot easier to do privacy. But if you don't have that base, then it's very difficult to keep your data private, understand what data you have, and basically understand the who, what, when, where, how of all of your systems. SBOMs, they're going to be everywhere. Software bill of materials, this really came to fruition after we had the whole Log4j incident. The other things that come into are the risk calculations. I mentioned that on the previous slide. But think of your own environment. Where are your devices running? Or where is the software that you are building or the product you are taking to market actually operating? Is it where you thought it was, or are people going somewhere else with it? So I mentioned a couple here, but I haven't mentioned that you have Navy, military, etc. They take these devices with them physically, and they go to other areas where the humidity, the dust, the dirt, everything else has nothing to do with the typical hospital or perhaps lab environment that you would see here in the US or even in North America. And so do consider that the environmental factors also become quite important. Supply chain risk. This is one of my pet peeves. And the reason it's a pet peeve is we just don't pay enough attention to it. I think everyone is starting to, but it's still a work in process. So I just put up some ideas on supply chain, both inbound and outbound. And the reason I'm dividing the two is that inbound is everything you need sort of to run your business. Outbound is your customers. It's from you to your customers. What are you doing? How does it affect it? Maybe you even have a couple of different layers. Your third party, fourth party, fifth party. And oftentimes some of the data breaches show up in the fourth and the fifth party. Not necessarily in the ones that you are doing business with that, okay, your GRC group had they brought them in, we looked at all of their documentation, they answered our questionnaires, we grilled them. Fantastic, but what if they subcontracted and that subcontractor subcontracted and it's not really clear in all of the documentation or in all of the contracts that you have what they are actually allowed to do or not? So back to that in big time of change, okay, and I'll keep circling back to that. As part of this, change is happening every day to you. It just may not be evident or top of line. So there's a lot of things here. Product side, open source, I think is a big deal. Auto updates, your raw material, people, process, technology, and IoT, and also OT. So your operational technology is a huge area to really pay attention to. And outbound, there's a whole set of different things. So let's talk a little bit about what's been happening in the industry. This will just take a couple of minutes for the next few slides. But here's a ransomware attack that happened this year. So as part of the ransomware attack in one of the most respected pediatric children's hospitals in the nation in Chicago, they ended up coming up with 4 different steps to deal with post-ransomware. But here's what's really coming out. There's a big tension between some of the older devices that you have to keep operating because your useful life is 15 years. Okay? You can't throw them out, and you need them because they have specialized tests. And you combine that with a whole set of security controls and the regulatory environment that you have to live in. Now I'm purely on the customer side. Okay? And what does that start to look like? It also is really saying that the whole industry is trying really hard, but they have to move sort of mountains before they can change a whole set of technology. So even though certain things are moving very quickly, so for example, new treatments or you have some kind of event that brings something to light, there's still a reality of it takes time in the back end. And of course, there have been some issues. So as part of the issues, here's 2 things to look at. This gives you an idea of where to go look. Okay. On the FDA site for Class 2 device recalls, this is public information. You could just go look it up. I just happened to highlight some in yellow. This happened to be a Medtronic device. It's not good or bad or for the company, it just is an example. But remember that almost everybody in this room's data is already exposed? Well, you know which breach I'm talking about, right? Illumina. Okay, how would you think that a device that is very physical and tangible, that typically sits in a lab or is deep inside a hospital, might have issues? Well, it did. And CISA also warns of some of the cybersecurity products. And what it's really saying is we have a whole set of groups starting to really pay attention, which is excellent. So a few other things. What's the future like? I just found this a really interesting stat. So there's a company called Stardust that did a review of what is going to influence medical devices the most over the next couple of years. And they've done this study a few years in a row. This is their current one, 2024. So cybersecurity got a 5%. And I'm jumping up and down saying, we finally actually are on the list. But here's the reality. Cyber's everywhere. It's actually about 95%. Because if we're not paying attention to cyber inside wearables, right? How many of you have a smartwatch? How much does your smartwatch know about you? Too much. Okay, good. Well, now you want to make sure that wherever that data is going, your data is protected and secure. But how many of you would have thought even 10 years ago you'd have a smartwatch? Okay, maybe a few of you hoped for one. But that's just an example. Okay, medical robots. There's much more happening now with laser technology and remote surgery, which is really interesting. And this down here is just, a few stats about wearable devices. What I find really interesting is how the install base, the difference between 2018 and 2025. So 25 is a prediction based on 24, but it basically is growing leaps and bounds. So how do you succeed doing all of this? Medical device cybersecurity. These are some thoughts divided into two pieces. So on the corporate business side as well as on the product or the device side. So on the corporate side, and none of this should come really as a big surprise to anybody, asset management. That's the one that I put at the top. You actively manage your third parties, then it goes into your data control. Access, encryption, fit for purpose. What does this look like? What are all the pieces and parts that are combined together? And then when you get to the product side, I applied the CIA triad to this because it should apply. This is basic concept for all of us. So the confidentiality, you're now talking about the patient data. But how have you stored it? Where is it? Who has access? How do they get access? How do you delete it? How long does it stay there? Integrity. Would you like to make sure that there's operational integrity if a device is keeping you alive? Probably. Okay, I will venture to say that it would be something that'd be important. And so one of the biggest things here is immutable results. So you don't want a cyber attack that changes the results on the machine. The results are the results. And you don't want a cyber attack that will change the methodology of creating those results. Whether it's a physical device that is measuring, for example, blood gas, right, which is actually like a physical device inside the device, but it's stored in a database. And so you want to make sure that that data is safe. The other thing to think about in manufacturing is manufacturing OT, but also IoT. They all sort of come together. Maturity curve. Where are you? I'm getting close to the end. 2 more slides, then we'll go into some Q&A. Think about where you are. Those basics. We talked about some of the basics all the way through this presentation. Right? So rather than creating a big slide for you, this was more of a think about what basic really means. IAM. Your basic cyber controls. Do you understand what is happening to your data And most importantly, if I leave you with nothing else today, answer this question. Who, what, when, where, how, and why is your data being accessed? If you've managed to put enough controls around your data, then you are in really good shape. And guess what? That means that the world can change around you. You can be on that roller coaster of change. And when it's a little slower, you can add some controls. And when it's going really fast, because you're now on the downside of a roller coaster, this means that you have enough in place that should keep you going and lessen the risk. Now, I'm never going to say zero risk because I don't live in that world. It's all about how do you react. Right? It's going to happen, so please just react well. That's why we have incident response, and we'll hear more about that this afternoon as well. So I'll leave you with one of these questions. How do you now feel about some of the critical infrastructure? Not as good? Okay, some people are saying, oh, I don't know, I don't want to answer that question yet. But keep it in the back of your mind because this is where it leads to. So there are rough seas ahead. Secure the basics, be ready for anything. That really means be ready to respond anytime something happens, but more importantly, have fun on this ride. Because we're all in it together, which also means that we will all help each other. And so if you're in really deep doo-doo, call me. I react fairly well to deep doo-doo messes. They don't worry me. They do action. Just, let's get it done. Let's focus. Let's do something. Let's get to the other side. So I'd love to take a couple of questions. I think we have 15-ish minutes. Thank you. Okay, and we'll bring a microphone to you. Just so we do have some people online, so we'll use the microphone so that they can also hear it.
With the advent of AI, especially in the healthcare space, where we're seeing applications where doctors can now have an interaction in a clinical setting recorded, transcribed, and put into an EMR, how many of those are actually going through a software as medical device application process as if it was a physical medical device?
So that's a really interesting question, and in my experience, almost none of what you are describing as the medical transcription actually goes through a medical device. So the medical transcription is more, it's the interaction with the system. The results or the test results coming in from the medical devices will be joined to that AI, but we are still at the very early stages of medical decision making that is AI supported. And so today it is not legal to make a medical decision that is only AI supported. Okay? You can't do it. You can leverage it. You can say, hey, great input. Let me now, as a medical practitioner, take that input and determine if I would have that same decision or if I would not have that same decision. Now, there's a lot more regulatory changes happening in Europe versus US, but one of the things that we have to consider is some of the regulation around AI. And so the whole concept of fit for purpose, no hallucinations, all of these types of things are real. And when you get into the medical environment, especially, we still believe that most of the time the humans will be making some of the better decisions rather than it being just a whole set of software and devices. Although I would argue that the devices can collate data a heck of a lot faster than any human can. And that's where AI really comes in handy, which is if you have very weird symptoms, one there, one here, one over there, and you put it into an AI model, it may come up with something people have not thought about. And when I say people is, your average ER doctor or your average clinician. But once they hear, hey, maybe there are 2 or 3 more things out there, then it opens up the door to understanding what it is. That is part of that rapid change. And so we still need some boundaries around it. So I think I answered your question, probably plus 2 more. But it's a topic I love to talk about. Any other questions?
Good afternoon, everyone. So what are your thoughts on quantum computing and the impact of quantum computing in cyberspace, and what would you advise for the organizations?
I will take quantum computing and I will raise you liquid processing. And so quantum computing, I believe, is the next generation. It will permit us to essentially do that detect and respond much more quickly, which means that we won't have to have as many people at the immediate front end looking through a whole set of data that's just not worth it. So it's not just false positive, it's just pure data that's noise. So quantum computing will help us in that sense. It will help cyber because we have this much information, and really we can only pay attention to about this much. And so by taking that huge amount of information and bringing it down to something that is more likely to get my attention, absolutely. So quantum computing can help there. But we also have to realize that it's only as good as the software you put in it. And so it's a mechanism for being so much faster. Absolutely. And that's actually why AI is working now. AI has been around for almost 30 years. But the reason we're hearing about it so much more over the last couple of years is that computer chips actually caught up to the amount of processing and the speed of processing the data. Right? And NVIDIA was really one of the key chip makers that really changed this piece of industry. So hopefully I've addressed your question from a quantum computing perspective.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. We probably have time for another, and then we'll give you a couple minutes off before you go over and see the vendors. All right. Well, then I will thank you very much. Thank you for being an audience today. And hopefully I've given you some food for thought and what to secure in this rapidly changing environment. Thanks.